Today we're going to go to Mariska Botha for that update. Mariska, you obviously crossed us a little earlier on and you were speaking about the impact this has had on commuters at large. Perhaps you could walk us through, as it is desperate times and there's a scramble perhaps to get to and from work at this point. What's transpiring on your end as we speak?
As you were speaking about the Golden Arrow bus services releasing their statement, we are actually at the Golden Arrow bus terminus in Cape Town at the moment, where in the last hour we've seen activity pick up greatly. Just behind us now, there were 2 buses that filled up in no time. The queues are longer than usual at this time of the hour. We spoke to a few people here. You can see the worry and concern on their faces. One woman telling us that she had to leave work 2 hours earlier, but her employer telling her, well, you can leave 2 hours earlier, but those 2 hours of pay you won't get. So these are the challenges that some of the commuters face at this moment. As you can see behind me, a lot of activity. This bus terminus has been very, very, very busy for the last hour. We spoke to a young person who told us last night that many, many people walk in dangerous areas. In his area where he lives in Hanover Park, there was load shedding at the time that he finally got home, so people had to walk in the dark. And before that, we spoke to a man working as a security guard, telling us last night he called an Uber to try to get home, and just as he was about to get into the Uber, he was mugged. He was robbed of his cell phone, his wallet, everything, and the taxi that he ordered simply drove off. And he simply turned around and went back to his offices in town and slept there last night. He says this morning he simply washed his face, and his employers helped him to contact his wife. So he'll be able to get home tonight, hopefully. He says he works until 6 o'clock, so he doesn't know what time he'll get there. But as I've said there, these are the challenges that people are facing. They're getting robbed, people are worried, their pays are getting docked, as they call it, and the queues have been long. Right now, several buses have cleared just a few minutes ago, but I'm just going to step out so you can see a little bit of the bus terminus. To the left here, we have Manenberg getting ready. The bus is loading now. We're seeing more and more people across the street also coming this way, trying to make their way here, trying to get a bus as early as possible, because last night there were absolute horrific scenes of people. I don't know if my colleague Clinton Surf can show you one of the bus windows at the top. They were lifting each other on each other's shoulders to get into buses through that tiny little window in the bus to make sure that they get a spot on that bus. And of course, Golden Arrow has to operate now not on their regular routes as they always do, but they use other directions and routes that they wouldn't normally do to secure their safety as far as possible. And they're also not stopping at all the points that people are used to. So for many, many people, this is a great, great difficulty getting home. There's another person to my right, my colleague Clinton, so can show you, scrambling to get to a bus. We've seen many, many of these people like her running, trying to get to a bus as quickly as possible. And as I explained just a few minutes ago, maybe 10 minutes ago, this whole area was filled with buses and commuters who scrambled to get into buses, already jostling for positions to be at the bus first. So one lady also telling us while she was in the bus last night on her way home, people were accosting them as they were parked on the highway, and they beat the bus with something like baseball bats, and they threw rocks at them. So they get on the buses to find a way home, but also they're not sure if it will be a safe passage home for them this afternoon. So a lot of activity still lying ahead, coming up a little bit later. The first rush peak is just over now. We're waiting to see for people who work a little bit later how it will go for them as they try to get home this afternoon.
Mariska, I wonder at this point if there's any signs as to when regular operations will ensue. And, you know, early on we were speaking about the situation in terms of tensions, fears about an escalation of violence and more disruptions and incidences. Have there been any others on record since our last crossing? Is there a high police presence as well in and around the city? Help us also paint that picture.
Absolutely. The number of police officers have vastly increased. We've seen none in town patrolling necessarily as they would. We understand they are all deployed in further areas that are more prone to violence and possible violence, like Khayelitsha, like Nyanga, where the buses were torched, for example. So definitely an increased police presence. Nyalas are out, water cannons are out. So the police services, the metro police, traffic services, and all other city law enforcement is also out in numbers in areas that are more prone to possible attacks on buses, for example. In the meantime, since we spoke earlier, we haven't heard anything yet as to whether there's talks in the meantime, whether there are perhaps meetings behind closed doors. We don't know at this stage. But the taxi industry, through Mandla Hermanus, of course, the provincial chairperson of Santaco, declaring this stay away until the 9th of August, which is Women's Day. So they will resume services again on the 10th of August. He also explained that that is not a decision that they take lightly, because for every taxi that is not operating, there's income that lost. And not only for a taxi boss who owns a fleet of taxis, but you must remember there's a driver in the taxi, and here in Cape Town we've got gachis that you can call a spotter or a caller that brings people to the taxi, that handles the money. So there's a whole number of people that work in and around a single taxi. So for the industry as well, it is not in their interest to have a protracted stay away. But as they said, they pulled out of the task team that was put together to speak about issues relating to taxis, because they feel, if you will, there's a willy-nilly impoundment of taxis, and that happened while they were busy with talks in that task team. So at this stage, the strike still stands until Women's Day, back on the roads again on the 10th. What might happen over the weekend, we simply don't know. But Mandla Hermanus of Santaco said to us that the industry is willing to speak to government. So perhaps over the weekend, we don't know, there might be some talks that take place. And of course also the Cape Chamber of Commerce also made an urgent plea to all the stakeholders to come to the table as soon as possible, because it says the economy of South Africa and the working class and the poor simply cannot afford a situation like this, where they have to scramble to get to work and from work, losing hours, not going to work at all, full day's pay getting docked. They simply cannot afford this. So it is in everyone's interest that this matter is resolved as soon as possible.
Absolutely. It's desperate times at this point, and the 9th of August seems a long time away. Mariska, perhaps for those who've just tuned in, you could recap the challenges that the industry is facing, perhaps which obviously led to the dissolution of talks that led up to the stay away.
Of course. What we heard from the Taxi Association yesterday through spokesperson, or the chairperson then, Mandla Hermanus, the bone of contention right now, look, there's been issues around the taxi industry being formalized for a number of years. But one of the major gripes is that the issuing of licenses are not being done. He made an example of a route called Brackengate that's been operating for 8 years, and the issuing of license is simply not coming forward. And then the other issue is the new bylaws that have been passed in the city of Cape Town that is much more strict than it used to be when it comes to vehicles on the road. Now, of course, JP Smith of the city of Cape Town is the MACO member for safety and security, saying that these laws apply to all citizens who use vehicles, public transport, and all of that. And it is not directed at the taxi industry. But of course, the taxi industry feels differently, saying that since January, over 6,000 vehicles have been impounded. And Mandla Hermanus said, of late, taxis are being impounded for the smallest of infringements. Now, he gave us a few examples, saying that in his fleet of taxis, at one point, the taxi driver was stopped, his license was in place, he had his public driver's permit, the taxi was sound and secure, and the law enforcement officer that stopped him found a crack in the number plates, and the taxi was impounded for that. That's the example that he used. He says it is minor, willy-nilly reasons that are used to impound taxis. And a number of taxis, around 300 taxis, are also being repossessed. Now, for every taxi that's repossessed, that's a taxi out of a fleet. That is at least 2 people that work on that taxi that has no more income. The taxi boss of losing that vehicle that's part of his fleet. So the economic impact on the taxi industry is also massive. As the Cape Chamber of Commerce also said earlier, it would be in everybody's interest if there's perhaps a better understanding and a softer approach when it comes to the taxi industry, because they do transport 70% of people in the Cape Town Metro, at least at this point in time, and that perhaps there should be a gentler approach when looking at this issue, given, as you also said, the economic crisis. It's desperate times out there, and it costs money to operate these taxis, and the taxi industry is saying that they are a vital component to making sure that the economy is operating. And if you look at that statistic, 70% of workers being transported by taxis, it is absolutely true. But then on the flip side, JP Smith saying safety and security of people on the roads as well, bringing down the death toll, bringing down incidents where people are hurt or injured or driving in vehicles that are not roadworthy has to be brought down. He said yesterday in a press statement, we cannot have an industry that tells us that because we are an important component, some of the mistakes we made or the faults that we have should be overlooked. He said that simply cannot be allowed. Where the answer lies in between those two issues, I don't know at this stage. But definitely it would be in everybody's interest to resolve this issue as quickly as possible, because it is desperate times. Right to the right of me, perhaps 100 meters from here, is the Cape Town train station. Trains are not operating as they should be. So for commuters who live far out of the city, we're talking about Khayelitsha, one of the major townships in the areas, is 20 kilometers from the CBD. So people have very little options when it comes to traveling to and from town to make a living.
You know, Mariska, there are obviously fears or conversations about whether this is going to spread to other parts of the country, but we'll leave the conversation there for now and monitor developments as the evening unfolds. Mariska Botha already gave us an update as the taxi stowaway occurs in the Western Cape province and the implications it's had on the city, on the taxi industry at large, but also commuters as well.